So I come from a very small town in northern Ghana known as Sabota. In 2005, I found myself in Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, the second largest university located in Ghana, located in the second largest city, Kumasi. On the Friday of my first week on campus, we were in my dorm room when all of a sudden from outside we heard, "Thief! Thief! Thief!" And what ensued next remains the most terrifying thing that I have ever witnessed in my life. Students started bursting out of their rooms, some flying from second floor balconies, feeling so stoked about the prospect of chasing down another thief. By the time my roommates and I got to the scene where they caught up with the suspect, which was a couple hundred meters outside of campus, everyone who arrived came running with something to hit the suspect. And after about 45 minutes of severe continuous beating, he was so battered, so injured, he started to give up on life. And he, under the breath of his voice, begged them to please forgive him, to please let him go. But instead, they found ropes and they tied his hands together, then they tied his legs together, and as he lay there, they continued to pound and smash his head until it was so mushy. I cannot describe to you what I saw next. That incident would not only violate my expectation of safety and security from university students, it would haunt me for the rest of my stay on campus, as I would turn the other way each time I saw a mob violating a suspect or hear an alarm of a thief. As I would close my ears to people narrating stories of similar incidents at other parts of town. For the entire 1 to 2 hours that we stood there for a death sentence to be rendered to a suspected thief, no police officer or university security officer showed up. And as I would find out later, that incident would never make it into the news. So, for a very long time now, and quite recently, we've been seeing horrible, horrible images of mob attacks coming out of South Africa. Images of people being beaten to death or burned alive in a city center while other people stand by. And throughout the world, including African countries, people have been quick to condemn South Africa for these horrible, horrible incidents. Unfortunately, what often goes unnoticed is that for each one of those images that we see coming out of South Africa, there is at least 100 more coming out of the rest of Africa. Except in those other instances, the victims are not immigrants, but our fellow traders, our fellow road users, our neighbors, sometimes our classmates, and our friends. And so regardless of who is being attacked, whether the person from Nigeria or Somalia or Zimbabwe, and regardless of where the attack is taking place, whether in South Africa or Kenya or Senegal, the question remains that how is it that people can and choose to go after suspected offenders among them in such a manner as to beat them, starve them to death, or burn them alive in the middle of a city center while other people stand by in what has become known as mob justice. Why? I want want you to think of mob justice as a response to a collective action problem. People are taking the law into their own hands to solve a problem of high crime in their communities, to solve a problem of very, very slow-moving justice systems, a problem of very, very untrustworthy institutions. In my review of African history, this is what I found. Africans historically believed in an individual natural right to punish. That is, every member of society had the right to punish people who break the law in society. But as communities grew larger, individuals consolidated these rights into many institutions known as chieftaincies or councils of elders, who established prisons, and sometimes everybody man of punishers will be ordered to render some amount of punishment to people who break the law in society. And so slowly and gradually, customs and laws emerged that expanded these institutions to ones that people trusted and beheld as their own. But everything changed in the late 1800s when the European colonizers started arriving in Africa. They declared each and every one of these institutions that Africans had painstakingly built, quote, unquote, repugnant. They dismantled each and every one of them, and in many cases banned them from ever operating. Instead, they imposed upon Africans laws and institutions that were designed from completely different cultures in response to totally different conditions and times. And so as the European colonizers exited Africa, what remained till today is institutions that nobody recognizes or trusts. In fact, in a very recent 2018 Afrobarometer survey, 46%, that's almost half of Africans, do not trust in their courts. And 66% do not trust in the police. So let me ask you, what do you think happens to somebody who gets accused of a crime in such a society? The images you see is your answer. So, first of all, there is a very, very serious institutional trust problem that has led us to this problem of mob justice. And it has historical implications, but also, like a cause and effect scenario, the institutions themselves have been very, very poor and very, very weak at sending strong deterrence to people who take laws into their own hands in that manner. And I'll give you two examples. This is Ernesto Alberto Namwale, a Mozambican. In 2008, Ernesto with his brother were in South Africa walking through a street when all of a sudden a mob chased them down. They beat them and injured them so bad. As he lay there trying to recover from his injuries, even though his brother managed to escape, the mob forced a blanket around him, and in this next photo right here, they set him alight in the middle of a city. This photo will make rounds around the world in what became known as the Burning Man. And what many people don't know is that 2 years later, the South African government would conclude investigations into Ernesto's death without a single conviction, without a single trial, without a single arrest. This is Maxwell Adam Mahama in Ghana with his lovely family. On May 29, 2017, Maxwell was out jogging early in the morning in a suburban town in southern Ghana when all of a sudden a township started chasing him down. They caught up with him and beat him to death. And in this next photo right here, my apologies, a woman is seen in a final act of defiance preparing fire on his body as people turn themselves into professional photographers. When it was all said and done, the woman who raised the alarm that led to his murder was asked, so what did Maxwell steal? And she had this to say, well, I saw him running with a gun strapped to his waist, and I thought, he must be running from a crime scene. Even though 2 years later, the government of Ghana would erect the tallest statue ever in the world in his honor, in honor of an innocent mob justice victim. As I talk to you right now, it's been 2.5 years, and not only are investigations still dragging on. There's no 3, there's no 2, and there's not 1, but 0 people are currently sitting in jail for this incident, as the government or the prosecution continues to grapple with the evidence they need to actually keep people in jail for such things. So, 2 years later, I asked myself, what could I do as a student of public policy and data analytics? And I said, well, I could, pull up the data and, show people how serious this thing is, or I could start writing research papers and, create awareness. And then I ran into a very, very serious but very common problem for anybody who has dealt with Africa in an academic capacity: data. In fact, throughout the entire continent of Africa, apart from South African Police Service, there's no any other police service in Africa that keeps any form of data on deaths by mob. So, earlier this year, a friend of mine by name Alberto Popo, a data scientist and statistical consultant, and myself decided to set up a computerized natural language processing system. Then we paired the system with terms such as mob justice, vigilante justice, lynching, and all sorts of similar terms. So what happens is when somebody out of Africa tweets or posts on social media, or when a news story is published out of Africa reporting such incidents, our system picks up all such stories, processes them, deletes duplicate stories, and stores for us the final report. We then go in, pull up the report, and then we validate those that we can manually verify into a final data set. What we have found so far is shocking and will shock you. Every 24 hours, 96 people are chased down, beaten to death, or burned by a mob in Africa. That is a death every 15 minutes. And mind you, these are just those that made it into the news or got a mention on social media. The most common accusation for most of the victims is theft or robbery. And in some very, very sad situations, if you get into a car accident with a pedestrian, as the driver of that car, the only way to stay alive is to run away from the scene before people arrive. This cannot be a productive way of fighting crime, I thought to myself. We have to be able to do something. And so first of all, given these problems, my first appeal tonight really is to my fellow Africans and individuals that do not be like me and turn the other way after that first incident when you see people violating a suspect. Instead, get as much information as possible, send it to the police, send it to a news organization, tweet about it, let us have a record, because it is only through data-driven research and evidence-based policy recommendations that we can put an end to this kind of crime. My second idea and recommendation is to the broader role that governments can play in rebuilding trust among people and in their institutions. And for that, I have a story that I want to share with you tonight. It is a story that informs the title of my talk, Localizing Justice and Privatizing the Right to Punish. In 2002, 7 years after the start of the Rwandan genocide, Rwanda was left with more than 800,000 war crimes and hundreds of thousands of suspected war criminals sitting in jail waiting for their days in court. It was estimated that it would take the nation of Rwanda at least 150 years to be able to go through and resolve each of these war cases. What did Rwanda do? They turned to an old African justice system known as Gacaca. Gacaca in Kinyarwanda Rwanda means grass, or justice on the grass. And under Gacaca, the country established 12,000 community courts throughout the country and empaneled these courts with judges elected from the communities as men and women of integrity, made up of both Hutus and Tutsis, the warring tribes during the genocide. And this is how a Gacaca court proceeding takes place. An accused will be called forth and his crimes laid before him, after which he will be allowed to defend himself. And then witnesses will be called forth to narrate their side of events to the judges who would deliberate after to determine the fate of the accused. Now, there's always going to be a lot to be discussed and said about the Gacaca courts. But this is what I love about them. If you were found guilty of, say, burning down somebody's house during the genocide, you were made to build them a new house. If they failed, you were made to cultivate them a new field. In less than 10 years, the Gacaca courts of Rwanda went through and resolved more than 1.2 million cases. This is the time to applaud if you want. I know it's been a very sad story. An African justice system. What did Rwanda do? They localized the administration of justice using local capacities and rechanneled the right to punish to the people directly impacted by the crime. What more, the court proceedings emphasize the values of trust, community, and reconciliation. Values that defined every single African justice system before colonization. And so, my final idea and appeal tonight is to the international community, which involves you. Whether you are a development consultant, whether you are an aid donor, whether you're an investor or an international organization, whatever capacity that you ever have to do with Africa for. Hear me out. We will never be able to achieve progress out of the horrible things that we currently perceive out of Africa until we allow Africans to build their own institutions using local capacities and talents. And I say this in closing. African institutions, and perhaps with European premise, will always work better for Africans than ever will any European institution for Africa. Thank you.